Picture this. You're at a party or a work event, maybe family dinner. Someone walks up to you, smiles, and says, "So, how was your weekend?" And your brain just stops. Not because you're shy, not because you had a bad weekend, but because somewhere between hearing that question and forming a response, your mind somehow shot off in 17 different directions at once, analyzing the tone of their voice, wondering what they actually want out of this exchange, mentally drafting 3 different answers, rejecting all of them, and landing on a weird flat, "It was good, pretty chill," that sounds nothing like you. The whole thing took maybe 4 seconds, but it felt like a systems crash. Here's what nobody tells you. That feeling isn't awkwardness. It's not anxiety, and it's definitely not a personality flaw. According to neuroscience, it's what happens when a brain built for depth gets handed a conversation designed for the surface. And today, we're going to break down exactly why. Because once you understand what's actually happening inside your brain during small talk, nothing will ever look the same. So here's where it gets interesting, because most people assume that small talk is simple. And for a lot of brains, it actually is. Someone says, "Crazy weather we've been having, right?" And the average brain processes that as what it literally is, social protocol. A handshake in word form. The brain scans for a matching response, finds one in about half a second, and moves on. No real processing needed. But a high IQ brain doesn't work like that. Psychologists call it being a deep processor. And what that means is that your brain doesn't just hear the words, it automatically runs an analysis on them. Tone, subtext, implied meaning, what this person actually wants from this interaction, whether their body language matches what they're saying, what the most honest, accurate, interesting answer would be, what that answer says about you, whether that answer is even appropriate right now. All of that simultaneously in response to, "How was your weekend?" It's like running a supercomputer to process a sticky note. And here's what makes it genuinely wild. You're not choosing to do this. You're not being difficult or overthinking on purpose. Your brain is literally built to process at a deeper level, and it's doing exactly what it was designed to do. The problem isn't the brain. The problem is that small talk was never built for it. There's a specific part of your brain that's at the center of all of it, and most people have never even heard of it. Meet the default mode network. Neuroscientists call it the DMN, and here's the simplest way to understand it. Most brain networks activate when you're focused on something external, a task, a problem, a conversation. The default mode network is the one that fires up when you're not focused on anything in particular, when you're daydreaming, reflecting, imagining the future, making sense of your own identity. It's basically your brain's inner world engine. And here's where it gets fascinating. Research has found that in highly intelligent individuals, the default mode network tends to be more active and more richly connected than in average brains. It's part of why deep thinkers are great at pattern recognition, abstract reasoning, creative problem solving, imagining outcomes before they happen. But there's a catch, a pretty brutal one. Because when your DMN is that active, it doesn't just switch off the moment someone starts talking to you. It keeps running in the background. So while you're standing there at that dinner party, supposedly just chatting about weekend plans, your default mode network is simultaneously running a parallel process, pulling from autobiographical memory, projecting social outcomes, doing self-referential checks, analyzing meaning. Small talk requires presence. Your brain is built for depth. And those two things are fighting each other in real time every single time someone says, "So what do you do?" And that conflict costs real cognitive energy. Emotionally, which is exactly why people with high IQs don't just find small talk boring, they find it exhausting in a way that's almost physical. Like running a sprint when you didn't even mean to leave the couch. But the DMN is only part of the story. There's another brain region involved, one that's even more responsible for why your words come out wrong when you're actually trying to connect. The very part of your brain that makes you smart is the same part that makes casual conversation feel like diffusing a bomb. It's called the prefrontal cortex, and it's the seat of everything we associate with high intelligence: logic, analysis, strategic thinking, executive function. When you're solving a problem, planning ahead, or thinking critically, your prefrontal cortex is the engine driving all of it. It's the part of your brain that separates a thoughtful response from a knee-jerk reaction. But here's the brutal part. In emotionally charged or socially complex situations, the prefrontal cortex in highly analytical people can go into overdrive. And when it does, it can actually suppress the amygdala, the brain region responsible for your natural, spontaneous emotional responses. Think about what that means. You're in a conversation. Someone makes a joke. The natural human response would be to laugh, a real, unfiltered, in-the-moment reaction. But your prefrontal cortex is already mid-analysis. It's checking whether the joke is actually funny, whether laughing would be appropriate, whether it changes the dynamic, whether there's a smarter observation to make instead. And by the time all that processing finishes, the moment is gone. You smile a half-second too late, the response feels wooden, and you know it felt wooden, which triggers another round of analysis. Psychologists call this pattern hypervigilant cognition, a fast-thinking mind that is always scanning for meaning. Incredibly useful when you're solving complex problems, but in the middle of a casual conversation, it hijacks the very naturalness that makes social connection feel effortless. It's why so many highly intelligent people describe small talk as feeling like a performance, because for them, it literally is one. They're not just talking, they're simultaneously analyzing, monitoring, filtering, and editing in real time, while everyone else is just talking. And the exhaustion that comes from that? That's not sensitivity. That's not introversion. That's the metabolic cost of running a high-powered analytical engine through a social situation it was never optimized for. But here's what nobody talks about: what this does to you over time. Because when this pattern repeats itself long enough, something else starts to happen. Something that goes way beyond just struggling at parties.
You start to adapt, and not in a good way. Some psychologists have documented what they call a masking effect in highly intelligent individuals. Over time, people who struggle with small talk don't just stay uncomfortable. They get good at hiding it. They develop scripts, practiced responses, safe, socially acceptable answers they can deploy on autopilot. Pretty busy lately, but can't complain. Yeah, weekends go by way too fast. Lines that keep the conversation moving without them actually being in it. On the surface, it works. They pass as totally normal in casual settings. But underneath, something quietly corrosive is happening. Because the gap between who they are in real conversations, the ones that actually engage them, that go somewhere, that feel like an actual exchange, and who they become in small talk situations starts to feel enormous. And that gap is exhausting to maintain. Every interaction where you're performing instead of connecting costs something. And over time, the easiest solution the brain lands on is simple. Just avoid it altogether. And this is where it gets genuinely painful. Some recent psychology writing has pointed to a compounded loneliness problem for highly intelligent people. Not just because connection is harder, but because finding people who match their preferred depth of conversation is statistically rare. And when the majority of social interaction available to them stays at the small talk level, they don't just feel bored. They feel fundamentally unseen. One line from that research floored me: a preference for nuance and abstract thinking being met with blank stares or labeled as overthinking in general social settings. Over time, that experience teaches smart people to keep the interesting parts of themselves quiet. The very qualities that make someone intellectually capable, the depth, the pattern recognition, the hunger for real meaning, become the things they learn to hide in public. And that's not shyness. That's not arrogance.
That's a person whose brain has been running on the wrong social frequency for so long that they've stopped trying to tune in. But the problem isn't that these brains are broken. The problem is a specific mismatch. And once you understand what that mismatch actually is, you can start working with your brain instead of against it.
It's not a flaw, it's a mismatch. Psychologists draw a distinction between two types of intelligence: introspective intelligence and interpersonal intelligence. Introspective intelligence is the ability to deeply understand systems, patterns, ideas, and your own inner world. Interpersonal intelligence is the ability to read people, navigate social dynamics, and connect effortlessly in real time. Most highly intelligent people are extraordinarily developed in the first category, and genuinely underdeveloped in the second. Not because they don't care about people, often it's the exact opposite. They care intensely. But caring intensely and connecting casually are two completely different skill sets. And small talk runs almost entirely on interpersonal intelligence. So when a high IQ brain enters a small talk situation, it's essentially trying to run software that wasn't designed for the operating system it's working with. There's also something called the need for cognition, a psychological construct first developed by researchers Cacioppo and Petty in the early 1980s. It describes a person's genuine drive to seek out and enjoy effortful thinking. People high in this trait don't just prefer depth in conversation, they need it to feel cognitively alive. Surface-level exchange doesn't just bore them, it understimulates them in a way that feels almost physically uncomfortable. Imagine you're a marathon runner, a genuine, trained, long-distance one, and someone asks you to take 2 steps and stop. You're not tired, you're not winded. You're just deeply, fundamentally unsuited to the pace of what you're being asked to do. That's a high IQ brain in a small talk conversation. Nicholas Epley, a behavioral scientist at the University of Chicago, ran research on exactly this dynamic. What he found was genuinely surprising. Highly intelligent people often avoid going deeper in conversations because they're convinced the other person won't want to go there, that a meaningful question will be met with awkwardness or silence or a weird look. So they stay on the surface. And the surface stays boring. And they walk away more drained than they arrived. But, and this is huge, Epley's research also found that when people do take the leap and open with something real, the response is almost always warmer than they expected. The fear of depth is almost always bigger than the actual social risk, which means there's something actionable buried in all of this. Because understanding the mismatch is one thing, but knowing what to actually do with a brain wired like this, that changes everything.
So here's where everything we've talked about actually becomes useful. Because knowing why your brain struggles with small talk is interesting, but knowing what to do about it without trying to rewire yourself into someone you're fundamentally not, that's the part that actually changes your life. And the first thing to understand is this: the goal is not to get good at small talk. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but hear me out. A brain wired for depth is never going to find shallow conversation naturally rewarding. Trying to force it to is like trying to convince a marathon runner that 2-step shuffling is actually fun if you just practice enough. It's not. And the effort of pretending it is will drain you every single time. The actual goal is to get good at using small talk as a launch pad. Here's what that means in practice. Small talk, the weather, the weekend, the vague pleasantries, isn't the conversation. It's the handshake before the conversation. And for most people, it stays a handshake. But for someone who knows how to use it, it's a doorway. Research from Nicholas Epley shows that the single most effective thing you can do is ask one real question early. Not deep in a way that feels like a therapy session. Warm, just real. What's been the most interesting part of your week? Instead of, how was your week? One small shift that signals you're actually curious about the answer, and the vast majority of the time, people respond to that. Because most people are quietly starving for a conversation that actually goes somewhere too. So it's not about performing small talk better. It's about shortening the distance between the surface and something worth saying.
The second thing, and this one is huge, is learning to stop monitoring yourself mid-conversation. Remember the prefrontal cortex problem? The overanalysis that suppresses your natural reactions, makes you laugh half a second late, makes your responses feel rehearsed. The way you interrupt that cycle is by shifting your focus entirely outward. Not onto what you're about to say, not onto how you're coming across, but genuinely, completely onto the other person. What are they actually telling you? Not just the words, what do they seem to care about? What lights them up? Where does their energy shift? Because here's the wild thing about deep processors. When they turn that analytical engine outward instead of inward, they become extraordinary conversationalists. The same brain that was getting stuck in self-monitoring mode, suddenly it's picking up on things most people completely miss. Subtle emotional cues, contradictions between what someone says and what they mean, the real story underneath the surface story. And it works in social situations the same way it works everywhere else, as long as you're pointed in the right direction. And the third thing is honestly the simplest. Emotionally, give yourself permission to be selective. Highly intelligent people often carry this quiet guilt about not enjoying parties, not thriving in big group settings, not being the person who can work a room for 3 hours and leave energized. But as psychologist Susan Cain put it, there is zero correlation between being the best talker in the room and having the best ideas. You don't need to be everywhere. You don't need to master every social format. You need to find the conversations and the people where your brain can actually do what it's built to do, and then go deep. Because the truth is, everything you've been treating as a weakness, the analysis, the hunger for meaning, the inability to stay on the surface, is actually the blueprint for the most meaningful connections you will ever make. You just have to stop apologizing for it first.
There's something bigger going on here that nobody really talks about. The reason intelligent people struggle with small talk isn't just a brain quirk. It's a cultural friction. Think about what modern social life is actually optimized for. Speed, efficiency, surface-level pleasantries that let large groups of people coexist comfortably without ever really knowing each other. Small talk isn't just filler. It serves a genuine social function. It's the lubricant that keeps casual environments from getting weird. And that's fine. That's genuinely useful. But that whole system was built for breadth, not depth. And some brains, your brain, were built for the exact opposite. And the friction you feel every time you're standing at a networking event, desperately searching for something real to say about the appetizers, that friction isn't a sign that something went wrong with you. It's a sign that you're a specific kind of person living in a world that wasn't fully designed with you in mind. And that's a long line to be standing in. Some of the most consequential thinkers, creators, and builders in history were exactly this kind of person. People who couldn't do the cocktail party thing, who felt unseen in casual settings, who were labeled awkward or aloof or too serious, and who channeled every bit of that misfit energy into work that actually mattered. Not because suffering is romantic, but because a brain that refuses to stay on the surface tends to go somewhere extraordinary when it's finally pointed at the right problem. Now, I'm not saying struggle is a badge of honor. I'm not saying you should be proud of having a hard time at parties. That's not the point. The point is this. There is a version of your life where you spend enormous amounts of energy trying to become someone who's effortlessly charming in every social context, who thrives on small talk, who lights up at the idea of working a room. And you will never fully get there, because that's not how your brain is wired, and chasing it will quietly cost you. And then there's another version, where you accept, really accept, that your brain runs on a different frequency, where you stop spending energy trying to tune into stations you'll never clearly receive, and start building a life full of the conversations, the people, and the environments where your signal actually comes through. Because the loneliness that so many intelligent people feel, the sense of being fundamentally misunderstood in casual spaces, it's not permanent. It's not inevitable. It's the result of being in the wrong rooms. Find the right rooms. Ask the one real question. Turn the analysis outward. Stop performing
and start selecting. Remember that moment from the beginning? Standing there, someone asks how your weekend was, and your brain just crashes? 4 seconds of silence that felt like an eternity. What you now know is that wasn't a malfunction. That was a marathon runner being asked to shuffle 2 steps. Here's the one thing I want you to walk away with today. The goal was never to get better at small talk. The goal is to stop mistaking the surface for the whole conversation, and to stop mistaking your discomfort with the surface as proof that something's wrong with you. Your brain processes deeper. It hungers for meaning. It refuses to stay shallow. That is not a flaw you need to fix. That is a feature you need to aim correctly. If this video hit close to home, and something tells me it did, hit that like button and subscribe, because we cover exactly this kind of stuff here. The psychology, the neuroscience, the real explanations behind why you think and feel the way you do. And remember, you were never bad at connecting. You were just connecting to the wrong conversations.